The stars, vast and endless, stretched across the dark canvas of space. Captain Tyke stood by the control panel of the Resilience, his fingers lightly brushing against the cold metal. His ship, a strong and reliable vessel, cut through the silence of space like a knife through soft cloth. It was a peaceful moment, or at least it should have been. Tyke's mind, however, was anything but at ease. He stared at the star maps on the screen in front of him. They weren't complicated. They never were. The Resilience was just following its course to the next sector. No danger, no surprises, but something felt off today. The hum of the engines, usually so reassuring, felt distant. The silence outside the ship, usually calming, made him uneasy. His crew, however, was the usual mix of calm and chaos. Everyone seemed to go about their duties without a care in the world, except for Lieutenant Zella. She had been acting strange for the past few days. Ever since their encounter with the alien ship on the edge of the sector, something had changed in her. Tyke couldn't shake the feeling that she was keeping something to herself. Zella was always quiet, but this was different. She had become distant, almost unreachable. It was as if she wasn't really there anymore, like she was a shadow of herself. The other crew members hadn't noticed. They were too busy with their tasks to pay much attention, but Tyke wasn't blind. He knew Zella, and he knew when something was wrong. He glanced over at her station. She was seated in front of the communications console, her dark hair neatly tied back in a braid. Her eyes were focused on the screen, but there was something in her gaze that wasn't quite right. Tyke had tried to make small talk with her earlier. He'd cracked a few jokes, tried to keep the mood light. But Zella hadn't responded, not really. She had smiled faintly, but it hadn't reached her eyes. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't even seemed to hear him. The silence between them was growing thick. And then, out of nowhere, Zella's voice broke the quiet. "You think I don't hear thoughts?" she said, her voice calm and steady. Tyke froze. His hand, which had been reaching for the console, went still. His heart skipped a beat. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been expecting her to say something, anything, but not this. He looked at her, his breath caught in his throat. There was something about her expression that made his chest tighten. Her eyes were no longer just focused on the screen. They were on him. It was as if she could see straight through him, as if she could see inside his mind. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. He couldn't find the right words to respond. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other, but nothing seemed to make sense. "What did you mean?" he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. His hands were shaking, though he didn't know why. Zella didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. The seconds stretched on, thick with tension. Tyke could hear the soft hum of the ship, but it was distant, almost like it was coming from somewhere far away. He couldn't focus on anything but the woman in front of him. Zella blinked slowly, as if she were considering her next words carefully. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer now but still steady. "I hear everything," she said. "Not just what people say. I hear their thoughts, their fears, their doubts, their deepest secrets. I hear it all." Tyke felt his stomach churn. He took a step back, trying to process what she was saying. You can hear what I'm thinking?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. But the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like it was nothing, made his stomach twist. Zella nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving him. "Yes," she said simply. "I can hear your thoughts, your fears about the mission, your doubts about the crew, and I can hear how you're thinking about me." Tyke's blood ran cold. How could she know? He had been careful, hadn't he? He had never let on, not even to himself, what was really going on inside his head. But Zella was different. She wasn't just any crew member. She was something else. He took another step back, his mind spinning. How was this possible? He had heard rumors of telepaths, of people who could hear minds, but he had always dismissed them as nothing more than myths. But Zella, she wasn't just a myth. She was standing right in front of him, looking at him with eyes that seemed to know everything about him. "I don't know how it happened," Zella continued, her voice distant now, like she was speaking more to herself than to him. "It just started one day. At first it was just little things, a stray thought here and there, but then it grew. It became louder, harder to ignore. Now it's impossible to turn off. I hear everything all the time." Tyke was silent. He didn't know what to say. What could he say? He had never experienced anything like this before. Zella wasn't just a crew member anymore. She was a mystery that he didn't know how to solve. He wanted to ask her questions, to know more, but the words stuck in his throat. His mind was too full of noise, too full of confusion. He was afraid that if he asked too many questions, he would only dig himself deeper into a hole he couldn't get out of. Zella seemed to sense his hesitation. She took a deep breath, then looked at him, her eyes softer now, almost apologetic. "I didn't want you to know," she said quietly. "I didn't want anyone to know, but you've been thinking about it, I can hear it, and I couldn't let you go on thinking I was normal." Tyke opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, he just nodded, his mind still reeling from the revelation. He had always trusted Zella. She was a loyal officer, a reliable presence on his crew. But this was different, and Tyke wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. As the silence stretched between them, the stars outside the window seemed to grow darker, the vastness of space swallowing everything whole. Tyke felt small, helpless, and for the first time in a long while he didn't know what to do. Captain Tyke couldn't shake the words Zella had spoken to him. "You think I don't hear thoughts?" echoed in his mind like a distant drumbeat, constantly growing louder the more he tried to ignore it. Every time he glanced at her, his heart would skip a beat and his mind would race. Zella, his reliable, quiet lieutenant, was no longer the same person he had known. The idea that she could hear his thoughts, his doubts, and even his deepest fears unsettled him. It wasn't just the shock of her confession that left him speechless. It was the reality of it. He had always thought of Zella as a calm, composed, and almost unreachable person, someone who had a way of staying cool no matter what. But now he realized that she had been carrying a weight no one could understand, a weight so heavy that even the strongest person would falter under it. Zella wasn't just a person with a gift. She was a prisoner of it. Every single thought, every fear, every insecurity from everyone around her trapped in her mind, constantly swirling, never giving her a moment's peace. Tyke tried to imagine it, but he couldn't. He couldn't even begin to fathom the toll it must have taken on her, the mental exhaustion of hearing everything all the time. For the next few days, things seemed to hang in the air between them. Zella still went about her duties like nothing had changed, but Tyke could sense it. The distance between them had grown. There was a quiet, invisible wall around her now, one that she hadn't put up, one that had been forced into place by something out of her control. The ship moved through the endless reaches of space. The hum of the engines, a constant reminder of how small and insignificant they all were compared to the vastness of the galaxy. And yet, Zella felt like the largest weight in that vast space, carrying more than any one person should have to. Tyke watched her, studying her carefully. She wasn't the same woman who had stood by his side on countless missions. She wasn't the same woman who had laughed at his jokes or shared quiet moments in the mess hall. Zella had become someone else, someone weighed down by the burden of hearing things no one else could. The other crew members noticed it too. At first, they thought she was just tired. Maybe the long hours and stress of space travel had gotten to her, but Tyke knew better. There was something darker at play, something deeper. Zella's eyes had become distant, lost. When she spoke, her voice lacked its usual warmth. She had become quieter, so quiet, in fact, that it felt like she was retreating into herself, disappearing behind a wall of silence. One evening, after a long stretch of watching her from afar, Tyke found himself walking to her station. It was late, and most of the crew had already turned in for the night. The lights in the hallways were dim, the ship bathed in a cold, sterile glow. Tyke stopped in front of her console and cleared his throat, unsure of what to say. Zella had her back to him, looking at the star maps on her screen, her posture rigid. "Zella," he said gently, trying not to sound like he was walking on eggshells. "We need to talk." She didn't turn around immediately. For a long moment, all he could hear was the soft hum of the ship, the rhythmic pulse of the engines keeping time with his heartbeat. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and flat. "We have nothing to talk about, Captain." Tyke's heart sank. This wasn't like her. This wasn't Zella at all. He stepped forward, his boots making soft clicks on the metallic floor. "Yes, we do," he said, his voice firmer this time. "You've been different, and I can't just ignore it anymore." Zella's shoulders tensed as she turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his over her shoulder. The look in her eyes was strange, distant, as though she was looking at him from miles away. "I don't want to talk about it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want anyone to know." Tyke swallowed hard. "But you can't keep carrying this burden alone, Zella. You can't keep hiding from us. You don't have to do this on your own." Zella let out a soft, bitter laugh, but it wasn't a laugh at all. It was something darker, something sad. You don't understand, Captain. You don't know what it's like. It's not just hearing your thoughts. It's everything. I hear the ship's systems, the crew's thoughts, their fears, their dreams. It never stops. And I can't turn it off. I can't control it. I can't escape it. Her voice wavered for a split second, and Tyke saw the faintest flicker of emotion in her eyes. For a brief moment, he could see the person she once was, the strong, confident woman who had been his trusted lieutenant. But it was quickly gone, buried beneath the weight of everything she was carrying. Tyke felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He wanted to reach out to help her, but how? How could he even begin to understand what she was going through? He had his own burdens, yes, but nothing like this. He couldn't even begin to imagine the chaos in her mind, the constant swirl of voices and thoughts that never stopped. I never asked for this, Zella continued, her voice shaking. It just happened, and now I can't turn it off. I can't shut it out. I'm drowning in it, Captain. Tyke felt his throat tighten. He had never heard her sound so defeated. Zella, the strong, capable woman who had always been the backbone of his crew, was breaking right in front of him, and he didn't know how to stop it. I'm sorry, Zella, he whispered. I don't know how to help you, but I won't leave you alone in this. We'll figure it out together. Her eyes met his, and for a moment Tyke saw something in them, a flicker of hope, however faint. Maybe it was a lie, maybe it was just something to cling to in the darkness, but Tyke meant it. He wasn't going to leave her alone in this. He couldn't. Zella looked away again, her gaze drifting back to the star maps on the screen. I wish I could just shut it off. I wish I could just forget everything, she said softly. Tyke stood there for a long moment, watching her, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He didn't know what to say next. He didn't know how to fix what was broken. But one thing was certain, he couldn't let her face it alone. He wouldn't let her carry this burden in silence anymore. The vastness of space stretched out before them, the stars so far away, yet somehow closer than ever. Tyke knew that they couldn't stay in this darkness forever. There had to be a way out, a way to help Zella. He just had to figure out what it was. The days dragged on like a slow-moving storm. Tyke could feel the tension in the air every time he saw Zella. She was always there, working tirelessly at her station, always focused on her tasks. But her eyes, those eyes that once held warmth and strength, had grown distant. Cold. It was as if the woman he had known had been replaced by someone else, someone who was slowly disappearing into the shadows of her own mind. Tyke couldn't stand it anymore. He could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Zella's pain, her silent struggle, was becoming more apparent with each passing day. She was always so distant, but now there was something deeper, something that went beyond mere exhaustion. It was fear, it was confusion, and it was eating her alive from the inside out. One evening, as the ship glided through the endless blackness of space, Tyke found himself standing in front of her station once again. This time, he wasn't going to let her push him away. He couldn't, not anymore. Zella, he said, his voice steady but soft. She didn't respond immediately, her attention still locked onto the blinking lights on her console. Tyke stepped closer, trying to ignore the racing of his heart. We need to talk. Zella finally looked up, her face unreadable. There was a brief flash of something in her eyes, something like surprise or maybe even resignation, but she said nothing. She just waited for him to speak. She always did. She had always been the one to listen, to support, to stand by him when it mattered. But now it seemed like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, too far gone to be reached. You don't have to keep carrying this alone, Tyke continued, trying to keep his voice calm. I know you've been struggling with whatever this is, the thoughts, the voices. You don't have to hide it from me anymore. I'm here for you, always have been. Zella's eyes softened for a brief moment, but then they hardened again. She turned her gaze back to the console in front of her, her fingers lightly tapping against the buttons. It was a nervous habit, one Tyke had noticed when they had first met. She was always so composed, so in control. But now that composure felt like a mask. You don't understand, Captain, she said, her voice almost a whisper. You don't know what it's like to hear everything, to hear every thought, every fear, every little doubt, every secret. It's not just the crew, it's the ship too. I hear its systems, I hear its pulse, I hear everything. Tyke felt his chest tighten. He had no idea what she was going through, but hearing her say it out loud, hearing the weight in her voice, tore at him in ways he couldn't describe. Zella, he said, taking a deep breath, we can figure this out, together. I'm not going to let you go through this alone. If it's too much, we'll find a way to help you. Zella laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. You think it's that easy? You think there's some button I can press to turn it off, to make it stop? She shook her head, her eyes looking more lost than ever. I've tried everything. I've tried to shut it out, but it's always there, lurking in the corners of my mind, always whispering. Tyke stepped forward, his hand reaching out as if to touch her shoulder, but he stopped himself. He wasn't sure if she wanted him to touch her or if it would make things worse. But seeing her like this, seeing her so broken, so distant, was more than he could bear. "Zella, please," he pleaded, his voice soft but firm. "Let me help. I know I can't fully understand, but I can try, and I will try every step of the way." She finally turned her gaze back to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't want anyone to know, Captain. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to be a burden." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Tyke saw the cracks in her armor. "You're not weak," he said firmly, stepping closer. "Zella, none of this is your fault. You're not a burden. You've carried this for so long alone, but I'm here now, I'm here, and I won't let you suffer in silence." For a long moment there was silence between them. The hum of the ship filled the space around them, and Tyke could hear the soft thrum of his own heartbeat. Zella didn't speak. She didn't move. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to change. Finally, Zella spoke, her voice barely audible. "You don't know what it's like to hear their thoughts, Captain. You don't know what it's like to hear their fears, their pain, their darkest secrets. You don't know how loud it is, how much it hurts." Tyke swallowed hard, his throat thick with emotion. He wanted to tell her that he understood, that he could relate in some way, but he couldn't. He couldn't even imagine what it must be like to have every thought of every person around you echoing in your mind. To feel their pain, their fear, their joy, all of it crashing over you like an unstoppable wave. He didn't have the words, but he could be there for her. He could listen. "I can't begin to understand what you're going through, Zella," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I promise you I won't leave you alone. I'll help you find a way through this. You don't have to bear this burden by yourself." Zella looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, it felt like she was trying to decide whether she could trust him with this weight. And then, finally, she nodded. It was small, barely a movement, but it was enough. "Thank you, Captain," she whispered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Hope. Not much, but just enough to make Tyke believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to help her. As he stood there, staring at Zella, he realized something. This wasn't just about saving the crew or the mission or anything else. It was about saving her. Zella had carried so much for so long, but now, for the first time, she didn't have to carry it alone. Tyke took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. They still had a long way to go, but together they would face it. Together they would find a way. And no matter how dark the journey ahead might be, Tyke knew that as long as he was by her side, they would never be alone. The days that followed felt heavy, like the ship itself was carrying the weight of Zella's pain. Captain Tyke could see the exhaustion in her eyes, could feel the silent battle she fought every day. She had always been strong, had always stood at the ready to face whatever came their way. But now she seemed like a different person. A person who was slowly fatting, buried beneath the weight of something no one else could understand. Tyke knew he couldn't just stand by and watch. He had promised her they would figure this out together. But every time he tried to get closer, every time he tried to break through her walls, she pulled away, retreating further into herself. It was like she was disappearing bit by bit, and no matter how much he wanted to help, he wasn't sure how to reach her. The crew had started to notice Zella's decline, too. They had always admired her calm demeanor and unwavering focus. Now they whispered behind her back, their concern barely hidden beneath their voices. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one had the courage to ask her about it. No one but Tyke. One evening, while the ship floated in the quiet expanse of space, Tyke found Zella alone in the observation deck. The room was bathed in soft light, the stars outside twinkling like distant memories. Zella stood by the window, her hands resting on the cold metal rail, gazing out at the void. Her face was a mask of stillness, but Tyke could see the storm raging beneath it. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This wasn't going to be easy, but it had to be done. He walked quietly up behind her, his footsteps muffled on the smooth floor. "Zella," he said gently, not wanting to startle her. She didn't turn around at first, but she didn't walk away either. She just stood there, her shoulders tense, as if bracing for what was to come. "You don't have to keep carrying this by yourself," Tyke continued, his voice soft but firm. "I know it's hard, I know you're suffering, but I can't stand by and watch you slowly disappear. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." Zella's shoulders stiffened at his words, and Tyke saw her grip tighten around the railing. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. She wasn't ready to let go, not yet. He knew that. But he also knew that if he didn't keep pushing, if he didn't keep showing her that she wasn't alone, she might slip through his fingers completely. "I'm fine," Zella said, her voice distant, almost robotic. "I can handle it. I've been handling it. I always have." Tyke shook his head, stepping closer, his gaze never leaving her. "No, you haven't. Zella, I see you. I see the way you're breaking inside. You can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's clearly not." There was a long pause. Zella didn't respond right away. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional clink of distant machinery. Tyke stood beside her, not saying anything more, just waiting for her to speak. He didn't want to force her, but he wasn't going to back down either. He had to be strong for her, even if she couldn't be strong for herself right now. Finally, Zella let out a long, shaky breath. She turned her head, and for the first time in days, Tyke saw a crack in her mask. Her eyes were filled with the weight of everything she had been carrying, and he could feel it in his chest. "I never wanted this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hear their thoughts. I didn't ask for this ability. It's a curse, not a gift. It's not something I can control. And every day it feels like I'm drowning in it." Tyke felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to reach out to comfort her, but he knew the walls around her were too thick. She wasn't ready for that yet. She wasn't ready to let anyone in. Not fully. "I know you never asked for this, Zella," Tyke said, his voice steady but filled with empathy. "But you don't have to carry it alone. We can help you. We can figure out a way to ease the pain to make it stop. You're not the only one on this ship. We're a crew, we're a family, and we'll do whatever it takes to help you." Zella's eyes flickered with something, hope maybe, but it was quickly masked by fear. She looked away, her face crumpling as she struggled to hold back the tears. Tyke could see the battle inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let him help her. But the fear of being vulnerable, of letting someone else carry a piece of her burden, was too great. "I can't let anyone see me like this," Zella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't let anyone see how broken I am. I can't be weak. I'm supposed to be strong, Captain. I'm supposed to be in control, but I'm not. And it scares me so much, Tyke." Tyke's heart twisted at her words. The woman standing before him, so strong and composed, was a mask for the fear and pain she kept buried deep inside. The truth was, she wasn't weak. She had been carrying the weight of the universe for far too long, and yet she still stood. She was the strongest person, Tyke knew, but that strength came at a cost. "You're not weak," Tyke said softly, his voice filled with the kind of understanding that only someone who truly cared could have. "You're one of the strongest people I know, but even the strongest need help sometimes. And I'm here for you, Zella. I always will be." For a long moment, Zella didn't say anything. She stood there, her body trembling, her face hidden from him. Tyke didn't know if she was crying or just holding it all in, but he could feel the weight of her pain pressing down on her. And for the first time in days, she seemed to crack open, even if just a little. Finally, Zella turned her head back toward him, her eyes searching his face. For a brief moment, Tyke saw the raw, unguarded woman beneath the layers of fear and control. The woman who had always been so strong. "Do you really think you can help me?" she asked, her voice shaky but filled with a hint of something that could be hope. Tyke nodded, his eyes steady. "Yes, Zella, I believe in you, and I believe in us. We'll figure this out together." Zella's lips trembled as she held his gaze. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, even if just for a moment. And in that moment, Tyke knew that he hadn't lost her. Not yet. The journey ahead was uncertain. The road was long and filled with obstacles. But Tyke would stand by her side every step of the way, and together they would face whatever came next. Because no one, not even Zella, should have to fight their battles alone, and Tyke would make sure she never had to again. The ship's engine hummed steadily as the crew worked through their daily routines. But despite the normalcy of it all, there was a tension in the air that couldn't be ignored. Tyke felt it in his bones every time he passed Zella. It wasn't just her silence anymore. It was the heaviness in her gaze, the way she seemed to move through the ship like a shadow of her former self. She had become more distant, more withdrawn, and it was clear to Tyke that something inside her was breaking. He had seen it happen before. He had seen strong people fall apart under pressure. But Zella was different. She wasn't just a soldier in his crew, she was his friend, his trusted lieutenant, and he couldn't bear to watch her disappear like this. It had been weeks since their last heart-to-heart in the observation deck, and though Zella had let down her guard for a brief moment, she still hadn't let anyone in. Not fully. She still fought to keep the flood of thoughts and voices inside her mind at bay. And the more she fought, the more she became a shell of the person she once was. Tyke knew he couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. He couldn't just sit by and wait for Zella to reach out to him. It was time for him to act, time for him to stop waiting for her to fix herself. The burden of her thoughts, the weight of her isolation, was too much for one person to bear, no matter how strong they were. One evening, after the crew had gone to bed, Tyke found himself standing in front of Zella's quarters. He hadn't planned it, hadn't rehearsed what he was going to say. He just knew that he couldn't stand by any longer. He took a deep breath and pressed the door chime. There was a long pause before he heard her voice from the other side. "Come in." Zella sat at her desk, her back to the door, her eyes fixed on the dimly lit screen in front of her. Her posture was stiff, rigid, like she was trying to keep herself together. Tyke stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but it had to be done. "Zella," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with concern. She didn't look at him, but he could tell she had heard him. He could always tell when she was listening, even when she didn't acknowledge it. "I need to talk to you," he continued, his words slow but firm. "You've been carrying this alone for far too long. I don't know what you're going through, but I know it's destroying you. And I won't stand by and watch you fade away. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here, Zella. I'm here for you." For a long moment there was no response. The silence between them felt suffocating, the weight of it pressing down on Tyke's chest. He watched Zella's shoulders rise and fall with each breath, her hands gripping the desk in front of her. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask for this, Captain. I didn't ask for this curse. I didn't ask for this power, this burden, but I have it. And now I'm stuck with it. I can't turn it off. I can't shut it out. It never stops, Tyke. It never stops." Her voice broke on his name, the quiet sob that followed pulling at his heart. Tyke took a step closer, feeling the overwhelming need to close the distance between them. He could see the raw emotion in her face, the pain and frustration that had been buried so deep for so long. He couldn't imagine the weight of her thoughts, the constant noise, the unending stream of voices and feelings that drowned out everything else. "I know you didn't ask for this," he said gently, his voice thick with emotion. "But you don't have to face it alone. I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to carry it all on your own anymore. You never did." Zella looked up at him, her eyes wet with unshed tears. For a brief moment their gazes locked, and Tyke saw something he hadn't seen in her eyes for weeks. Hope. It was fragile, like a flickering candle in a storm, but it was there. "I don't know how you can help me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know how anyone can help me." Tyke knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on the desk, just close enough for her to feel his presence without invading her space. "I don't know the answer either, Zella," he admitted, his voice soft. "But I know that I won't stop trying, and I won't let you go through this alone. You're not a burden to me. You never have been. We're a team. We always have been." Zella's lips trembled, her eyes staring at the desk, her hands still gripping the edges. She was trying to hold herself together, trying to fight the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. But Tyke could see the cracks forming in her armor, the walls she had so carefully built starting to crumble. "I'm so tired, Tyke," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so tired of fighting this. It's too much. I don't know how much longer I can keep going." Tyke's heart twisted in his chest at her words. He had never seen her so broken, so vulnerable. She had always been the strong one, the one who kept everything together when the rest of the crew faltered. And now, for the first time, he saw the truth of it all. Zella wasn't invincible. She was human, just like the rest of them, and even the strongest people had their breaking points. He took her hand in his grip gentle but firm. "You don't have to keep fighting on your own," he said softly. "Let me help you. Please, Zella, let me in. Let me be the one to help carry this weight with you." Zella's eyes met his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let her guard down. She didn't pull away. She didn't shut herself off. She allowed herself to feel the comfort of his touch, the security of his presence. And in that moment, she let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. "I don't know if I can ever be free of this," she whispered, her voice full of uncertainty. "But maybe with you by my side, I can learn how to live with it." Tyke nodded, his expression filled with unwavering support. "We'll figure it out, together." There was no magic cure. There were no quick fixes. But in that moment, Zella realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Tyke, and she had the rest of the crew. They were all in this together, and as long as she had them by her side, maybe she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her own. As they sat there in the quiet of the room, the hum of the ship the only sound, Zeller allowed herself to hope again. It wasn't much. It wasn't a promise of an easy road ahead, but it was enough. She wasn't alone anymore, and that was all that mattered. Tyke had made her a promise, and in that moment she believed him. Together they would find a way forward. The days on the Resilience seemed to move slower now, weighed down by the quiet tension that still lingered in the air. But things had shifted. Zella wasn't the same, and neither was Tyke. Something had changed between them after that night, something unspoken but powerful. The walls she had spent so long building around herself had started to crumble. Slowly, bit by bit, she allowed herself to trust him again. Tyke could feel it too. It wasn't easy, nothing about Zella's situation was simple, but the connection between them had deepened. She wasn't just his lieutenant anymore. She was his friend, someone who had been fighting a battle alone for so long, and now they were fighting it together. Yet despite the small victories, the moments when she would smile weakly or nod in his direction, there were still days when Zella seemed unreachable. Tyke knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with struggles. The burden she carried was far from over, but the difference now was that she wasn't carrying it alone. She had him. She had the crew. They were all there for her, and somehow just knowing that made it a little easier for her to breathe. But that didn't mean it was easy to live with it. The voices still filled her mind, the constant hum of thoughts from the crew, the ship itself, even the stars outside the window. It never stopped. Tyke had watched her on those days when the burden felt like it was too much. He'd seen the strain in her eyes, the way she clenched her fists when the noise became too loud. It was like she was drowning in a sea of thoughts she couldn't escape. And yet she tried. She tried so hard not to let it show. One afternoon, when the ship was passing through an empty sector, Tyke found Zella sitting alone in the mess hall. She had her head resting in her hands, her elbows on the table, staring down at the empty space in front of her. She looked smaller than usual, smaller than the confident woman who had always been the heart of the crew. Tyke hesitated at the doorway, unsure of how to approach. He had seen her struggle like this before, and he knew it wasn't something she was ever going to say out loud. Zella wasn't the type to ask for help, but she didn't have to, not anymore. He walked in quietly, his footsteps soft on the metal floor. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Zella didn't look up right away. She simply nodded, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. Tyke sat down across from her, not saying anything at first. He didn't need to. They were both still learning how to be there for each other without words. Zella had spent so much time hiding her pain, hiding the chaos inside her, but now it was clear that she didn't need to hide it anymore. Not with him. "I know you've been struggling," Tyke said quietly after a moment, his voice low. "I can see it, and I can't pretend I understand what it's like to hear everyone's thoughts, to feel everything all the time, but I know you don't have to carry it alone." Zella finally looked up at him, her eyes tired, but there was something in them, something that Tyke recognized as gratitude. "I don't know how you do it," she whispered. "I don't know how you keep going, how you don't let all of this get to you. I wish I could be stronger like that." Tyke shook his head, his eyes soft. "Zella, you are strong, stronger than you realize. You've been carrying this burden for so long, and yet here you are, still standing. That's strength more than most people can even imagine." Zella let out a small, shaky breath. She was silent for a long time, and Tyke could see the fight inside her. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. It wasn't just the power of hearing others' thoughts that was weighing on her. It was the fear of being seen as weak. Fear that if she showed even a crack in her armor, she would lose control. But Tyke knew that wasn't true. No one would see her as weak, not him, not the crew. "Zella," he said softly, leaning forward a little. "You don't have to pretend to be perfect. You don't have to carry this on your own. No one expects you to be some kind of superhero. You just have to be you, and we'll be here for you every step of the way." For the first time in what felt like ages, Zella's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. It was small, but it was real. Tyke could see the walls inside her start to fall piece by piece. It was like she had been holding her breath for so long, and now, with his words, she was finally exhaling. "You really mean that, don't you?" she asked quietly, her voice a little steadier now. Tyke nodded, his smile soft but unwavering. "I do. You don't have to go through this alone, ever again." Zella didn't speak for a while, but she didn't need to. The weight in the room had shifted, the air around them lighter than it had been in days. She wasn't completely free of the burden she carried, not yet. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. "Thank you, Captain," Zella said finally, her voice small but sincere. "For not giving up on me, for not leaving me in the dark." Tyke gave her a small smile, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made her heart swell. "We're a team, Zella, always." It wasn't a magical fix. It wasn't the end of her struggle. Zella knew that, but it was a start, and sometimes that was all you needed. The rest of the day passed quietly, with Tyke and Zella working side by side as they always had. But there was something different now, something that neither of them could deny. They had found a way back to each other, a way forward, even if it was just a small step. Later that night, when the stars outside the ship seemed to stretch on forever, Zella stood by the window, staring out at the vastness of space. Her mind was quieter now, not silent, but quieter. She had learned that she didn't need to be alone in her pain, that it was okay to let others in, that it was okay to need help. And maybe, just maybe, that was the key to finding peace. Not in shutting everything out, but in allowing someone to be there with you when it felt like everything was too much. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time she felt like she could face it. Because Tyke had shown her that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always light somewhere in the distance. And sometimes, all you needed was someone to help you see it. The days blurred together as the Resilience continued its journey through the vastness of space. The crew was still working, still pushing forward, but everything felt different now. The ship's hum, the routine, the endless drift through the stars, none of it felt the same without the weight of Zella's struggle hanging over them. There was something lighter in the air now, something warmer, even though the problem hadn't magically disappeared. But for the first time in weeks, Zella seemed to be carrying that burden a little more easily. She wasn't the same woman she had been before, but that didn't mean she wasn't strong. It just meant she was learning to lean on those who cared about her, and in doing so, she was healing. Zella still had days when the thoughts and voices in her head became overwhelming. There were moments when the pressure seemed unbearable, and Tyke could see it in her eyes, the way her hands trembled just a little, or the way she would close herself off for a while. But he had learned not to push. He had learned to let her come to him when she was ready. He didn't have the answers, he knew that, but he knew that simply being there, quietly offering his presence, made all the difference. It wasn't easy, though. Zella was still learning how to navigate the constant flood of thoughts that crashed into her mind. And though she had opened up to Tyke, she was still a long way from feeling fully at peace. But she was trying, and that was something. One evening, after a long day of work, Tyke found Zella sitting alone in the observation deck again. The stars outside were like pinpricks of light scattered across a dark, endless sky. Zella was staring at them, her hands resting on the glass of the window, her expression distant. For a moment, Tyke hesitated. He wasn't sure if she wanted company, but something in her posture told him she needed someone. He stepped into the room quietly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said softly, his voice steady but warm. Zella didn't look at him at first, but she didn't pull away either. She just stayed there, staring out at the stars, lost in thought. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "It's peaceful here," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The stars, I mean, out there everything is quiet. It feels like maybe there's a place where I could find peace." Tyke smiled a little, stepping closer. "I know what you mean. Sometimes the stars make everything feel smaller. Like no matter how big the galaxy is, it's still just a tiny part of something even bigger, something we can't even begin to understand." Zella turned her head to look at him, her eyes soft but tired. "I've been thinking a lot about that," she said quietly. "How small we are in all of this, how much is beyond our control. The thoughts, the noise, it feels like I'm drowning in it sometimes." Tyke's heart tightened. He had seen her struggle with it, but hearing her say it out loud made it more real, more raw. It wasn't just the burden of hearing everyone else's thoughts. It was the fear of losing herself in them, of becoming someone she didn't recognize. "You're not drowning, Zella," Tyke said, his voice firm though filled with gentleness. He stepped closer to her, placing a hand on the glass beside hers. "You're not alone in this anymore. You don't have to carry it all. I'm here, and I always will be." Zella's eyes flickered with something, maybe hope, maybe a deep sigh of relief. But it was there, unmistakable. She nodded slowly, her lips pressed together in an almost imperceptible smile. For a moment, Tyke saw the woman she used to be before the weight of the voices had crushed her spirit. He saw the quiet strength she still had within her, the woman who wasn't willing to give up, who couldn't give up, not with so much left to fight for. "You've been so patient with me," she whispered. "I don't know how you do it, how you can stand by me through all of this." Tyke gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me, Zella. I'm here because I want to be. You don't have to do this alone. We're a team, remember." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Tyke felt something shift between them. It was as though they had both crossed a line together, a line between being two people simply sharing a mission and being two people who truly understood one another. There was a shared weight between them now, not just the burden of Zella's struggles, but the responsibility of being there for each other in ways that no one else could. For the first time in a long while, Zella allowed herself to truly relax. She didn't feel the constant pressure to keep it all together. She didn't have to pretend anymore. She could simply be with all her fears and imperfections, and Tyke would still be there. He wouldn't walk away. "You know," Zella said, her voice lighter now, "I've been thinking about how long it took me to let anyone in. How hard it was to trust that someone could really be there for me without expecting me to be perfect." Tyke raised an eyebrow, a small, playful grin tugging at his lips. "And now?" Zella chuckled softly, the sound like a faint breeze breaking the silence. "Now, I'm starting to believe that maybe it's okay not to be perfect. Maybe it's okay to lean on other people sometimes." The words were small, but they were powerful. Tyke knew that she was finally beginning to accept something he had always known. There was no shame in needing help. There was no shame in being human. Zella turned back to the window, her eyes searching the stars. "Maybe one day I won't feel the weight of everyone's thoughts all the time," she said quietly. "Maybe it'll stop being so loud in my head. Maybe I can find peace." Tyke watched her closely, feeling a warmth spread through him. "You will," he said with certainty. "You're already on your way, and you don't have to do it alone, not anymore." Zella looked back at him, her gaze steady. "Thank you, Tyke," she whispered, "for being here, for not giving up on me." Tyke smiled, his eyes full of something deep, something that went beyond friendship. "There's no giving up on you, Zella, your family." They stood there together for a long time, the quiet comfort of each other's presence the only sound in the room. The stars outside seemed to sparkle a little brighter, the darkness of space less intimidating now. Zella still had a long way to go. The thoughts wouldn't stop overnight. But she had taken the first real step toward healing, and that was something worth holding onto. With Tyke by her side and the support of the crew, she knew that she wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future held, because in the end, they were a team. And that was enough to carry them through.